Today, we're diving into the most talked about passages from Kevin Federline's memoir, You Thought You Knew. He makes a series of shocking claims about his ex-wife, Britney Spears, allegations involving their children, her behavior, and his own role. We'll review each major claim, examine the context, and ask, how credible are they? And how do they affect what we know about the bigger story? But before we dive deep into all of this, please make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Show some love and support. This channel only grows and survives with your help, so thank you for being here. Kevin Federline opens his memoir with one of the most emotionally loaded stories from his marriage to Britney Spears, a late-night phone call that he claims changed everything. This moment, according to him, became the turning point that convinced him their marriage was collapsing. Based on the published excerpts and reported summaries, here's the core of his story. Kevin was out of town for work, Miami, according to some reports. Late at night, he received a call from Britney. He claims Britney sounded intoxicated, slurring her words. He says he could hear their sons crying in the background while she was out with friends. He says the call instantly alarmed him, both as a husband and as a father. This moment, he says, made him realize their home life wasn't functioning anymore. To Kevin, this wasn't just an upsetting phone call. It was a symbol of a bigger collapse happening behind the scenes. Kevin places this moment at the beginning of his book, which is a deliberate narrative choice. In memoirs, the first major scene is almost always the emotional anchor of the entire story. By choosing this incident as the opening, Kevin signals several things to the reader. He wants to establish himself immediately as the concerned parent, presenting himself as someone who stepped in when things felt unstable. He wants readers to view the marriage through the lens of Britney's instability. This frames the rest of his claims: substance concerns, emotional unpredictability, and childcare problems, as part of a bigger pattern. He wants the audience to understand his decision to leave as protective rather than opportunistic, particularly because the divorce involved money, custody, and public perception. This opening chapter lays the emotional groundwork for everything else he says. When this claim circulated in the press, Britney's representatives rejected the picture Kevin was painting. Their public response was calling his stories hurtful and inaccurate, suggesting the memoir was trying to reframe history through Kevin's bias, pointing out that Britney has repeatedly said she loves and misses her children, implying the book is capitalizing on Britney's name after their children reached adulthood. These counterpoints don't disprove Kevin's story, but they show the dispute over interpretation. This claim relies entirely on Kevin's memory. There are no phone recordings, nanny statements, police reports, text messages made public, third-party confirmations. And because the call allegedly happened almost 20 years ago, memory reliability becomes a factor. Celebrity psychologists often note that memories from high-stress marriages can become distorted, emotionalized, simplified, used to justify later choices. This does not mean Kevin is lying. It simply means his version is his interpretation. Federline's memoir reportedly alleges that Britney used cocaine while feeding their children, a dramatic and troubling accusation. What he says, he writes that during their marriage, there were instances of what he viewed as erratic behavior, including alleged substance use. One published excerpt claims her sons would awaken to find her standing silently in the doorway with a knife in her hand. These are extremely serious allegations. They involve child welfare, substance use, and mental health. Britney has strongly denied some of these claims, saying his book contains white lies and that the public is being asked to pay attention to tabloids of my mental health and drinking. Marie Claire UK. As a viewer, one should ask, are there medical records, witness statements, nanny or co-parent testimony? Also, why is this being revealed now? How much time has passed? Does memory and narrative bias matter? In his book, Federline claims that Britney sometimes treated their older son, Sean Preston, in a way that felt unequal. That is, he says she favored their younger son, Jaden, and that there were incidents that traumatized Sean. He writes that Preston felt neglected while Jaden received most of her attention. He alleges that his sons eventually told him they didn't want to go to their mother's house anymore. Sibling favoritism is not uncommon in family conflict scenarios, but in a public celebrity setting, it adds complexity. Important to ask, are these claims backed by direct quotes from the children? Did they speak for themselves? Also, was there professional help or mediation involved? School records? Therapists' notes? In analyzing this claim, a viewer must consider how much of this is perspective, Federline's vantage, and how much is objective fact. According to excerpts, Federline states that during custody visits, the children once came back with chemically bleached hair that had burned their scalps. He also alleges forced baths with their mother for Jaden, even after potty training. The boys returned from their mother's house with their scalps literally burned from bleach. Preston reportedly told Federline, "Why does Mom keep making me bathe with her?" These are specific, detailed claims. If true, they are startling and serious. But are there hospital records, school records, photographs, or corroboration? The public reporting doesn't display such evidence yet. For the viewers, what does unsettling mean? Are we dealing with legitimate child welfare concerns, or he said, she said conflict? Also, how much time passed between the incidents Federline claims and when he publicized them? Memory can fade or shift. In his memoir, Federline writes about the period after Britney's 2008 conservatorship began. He frames it not only as a story of control, but as a ticking time bomb for their sons and family. He writes, "From where I sit, the clock is ticking and we're getting close to the 11th hour. Something bad is going to happen if things don't change, and my biggest fear is that our sons will be left holding the pieces." He expresses concern that the children's well-being is at risk. He argues that the initial movement, #FreeBritney, might have been valid, but now it needs to be about survival. Federline positions himself as warning of future danger rather than merely retrospecting. This aligns with a narrative of fatherhood needing to protect children. But critics say, why did he remain largely silent during the conservatorship's worst years if his concerns were so acute? A neutral viewer might ask, is this a genuine act of advocacy or a positioning tale for the memoir? Another claim making rounds. Federline suggests that Britney never fully moved on from her previous relationship with Justin Timberlake, which he says created an emotional barrier in their marriage. He recounts her calling Justin the night before the wedding to address unfinished business. He argues that this dynamic caused underlying trouble in their marriage. For the viewer, these type of relationship issues are deeply personal and complex. Important question, is this relevant to the children's welfare, or is it more about adult emotions and celebrity baggage? Also, are these reflections or allegations? If reflections, how much of the claim is hindsight rather than real-time evidence? In an excerpt reported by Entertainment Weekly, Federline claims that he caught Britney being intimate with a female backup dancer while on tour in Amsterdam. He says the moment was a turning point in their relationship. This claim adds a dimension of infidelity and trust breach to his narrative. If true, the allegation is serious and would affect both trust in the marriage and the co-parenting dynamic. However, the claim involves a third party and possibly charges of defamation, depending on how specific the claims are. Viewer should ask, what evidence is presented? Are names, locations verifiable? Are there third-party witnesses? Also, how does this claim tie into the broader story of fatherhood, the children's welfare, and the narrative of the memoir? Federline writes that at some point, their sons decided not to continue visiting their mother's house. saying they were emotionally drained, that the visits just didn't feel safe anymore. He describes a scene where the boys told him, "We're done. We're not going back." He argues the children's well-being had become his priority over maintaining a shared household structure. This claim is one of the more dramatic ones because it involves the children's agency. But are the children giving statements themselves, or is this entirely Federline's account? As a viewer, think about the impact. When children reject a parent's home, what does that suggest? Who interprets it? What evidence is there? Solve. Is this about safety concerns, emotional exhaustion, or simply teenage rebellion? The memoir gives Federline's perspective. The full story may be more nuanced. Federline suggests that the older son, Sean Preston, experienced a sense of neglect compared to his younger brother, Jaden. The claim is that Britney's emotional attention leaned toward the younger sibling. He says Preston carried that pain for years. He frames his role as stepping in to protect his older son from emotional harm. Family psychologists often note that feelings of sibling neglect can have long-term effects. However, without voices from Preston or therapists, it remains Federline's perspective. Viewer reflection. Is this about parenting style, childhood development, celebrity stress, or a power dynamic in a high-profile split? In the memoir, Federline describes the moment he learned of Britney filing for divorce as unexpected and humiliating, caught off guard by a news query while preparing for a live appearance. He describes a producer in Canada telling him ahead of a broadcast, "How do you feel about Britney filing for divorce?" And his response, "Frozen." He uses this moment to frame himself as the wronged partner, blindsided by the split. Divorce announcements often become media events, but to claim one was ambush suggests lack of communication or betrayal. Viewers should ask, what was the status of their relationship just prior? Was there marital counseling? Did both parties anticipate the split? This claim sets the tone for his broader narrative of himself as victim, a perspective the memoir emphasizes.